Good morning everyone. Welcome to the English class. Have you all heard about George Washington? George Washington was the first president of the United States of America from 1789 to 1797. He was born into a rich family as the eldest of 6 children. He was an able administrator and a judge of talent and character. Today, we are going to learn Chapter 4, The Cherry Tree, which shows an incident that happened in the childhood days of George Washington. So, all of you please take your English workbook, turn to page number 23. You see the heading, Chapter 4, The Cherry Tree. Let's read the story. Please look into your book. One morning, George Washington received a hatchet, which is a small axe, as a present. He was extremely excited and decided to try out his new gift at once in the garden. So one morning, he gets a new present. He gets a hatchet, which is a small axe. And just like you all, he got really excited when he got a gift and he ran to the garden to try out his new gift. As he was running out of the house, his father stopped him and said, "A hatchet is no toy, George. It can do great harm if you are not careful." So the axe is a sharp tool, right? So if you play with it, it's likely that you get injured. So George's father advised him, it's not a toy, don't play with it, be very careful when you use it. Do use it wisely. You may use it to chop wood and help your mother prepare firewood for the kitchen. So his father told him he can use the hatchet to chop wood so that it will be a help for his mother so that the wood can be used as firewood in the kitchen. The boy listened to his father's advice quietly. He promised he would be careful and walked out of the house towards the garden. So George listened to his father's advice and he promised and he assured his father that he would be very careful with it and just won't play with it. George reached the garden and forgot his father's words. He first used the hatchet on a patch of weeds which were growing near the flower bed. He was excited to see just how sharp the blade was and how it could cut through the thickest of weeds in a single sweep. So he got really excited when he ran to the garden and he tried out the axe, the small axe or the hatchet on some weeds which were growing near the flower bed in the garden. He was just amazed to see how the hatchet could remove the weeds in just one quick sweep. So he kept on using the hatchet on different plants and trees. This encouraged him to move on to other plants. So when he saw the weeds were gone in just one sweep, he thought he should try it on other plants as well. At the end of the garden was a small area where George's father had planted some of his choicest trees. One of them was a young cherry tree. So there was this area in the garden where George's father had planted some of his favorite trees. And one of the trees was a young cherry tree. George stood in front of the cherry tree. He looked at it and wondered if he would be able to cut it down in one go. George's father had advised him not to play with it. Do use it wisely to chop wood to use as firewood in the kitchen. But George forgot his father's words as soon as he reached the garden. So when he saw the cherry tree, he thought he should try the hatchet on the cherry tree. So what did he do? With great excitement and determination, George swung the hatchet and hacked the cherry tree in 2 pieces in one swift motion. So George goes to the end of the garden where his father had planted his choicest trees, his favorite trees, and George sees this cherry tree and he thought, I should try this hatchet on this cherry tree. And in just one quick motion, in just one quick sweep, he cut the cherry tree with the hatchet in 2 pieces. He cut a few more weeds in the garden before he went back home and washed up for dinner. So he continued this act of his and he tried out the hatchet on a few more weeds and In the evening, he went back home and he was ready for dinner after washing up. In the evening, on his way back home from work, Mr. Washington saw the cherry tree cut in two. He entered the house and asked his wife in an angry tone if she knew who had cut down the tree. George heard his father's voice from his room. So it was evening, it was time for dinner, and Mr. Washington came back home after his work. So when he got back his home, he saw one of his choicest trees, the young cherry tree, being cut in two. He got really angry seeing this, and he called out to his wife and asked her if she knew who had done this. And George heard his father's voice from his room. Though he was terrified of his father's anger and knew that the punishment would be severe, he also knew that he had to tell the truth. George knew he did something wrong. When he heard his father's voice from the room, he knew he was going to get some severe punishment. He knew his father was angry. But at the same time, he knew he had to tell the truth instead of lie. Frightened, George walked to the room where his father and mother were talking and said, "I cannot tell a lie, father. I cut down your cherry tree." George looked at his feet, for he was afraid and could not meet his father's eyes, and continued, "I wasn't careful with the hatchet. I'm sorry, father." George knew he did something wrong. He cut one of his father's choicest trees. His father had advised him in the morning that he should use the axe wisely and don't play with it. But as soon as George entered the garden, he forgot his father's words. He got playful and very excited, and he was not thinking what he was doing then. So George got so terrified, he got so frightened about what his father was going to tell him and what severe punishment he was going to get. He was so frightened that he could not look into his father's eyes. So standing there in front of his father, looking at his feet, not being able to look into his father's eyes, even though he could tell a lie, he chose to say the truth. Then he waited to hear what his punishment would be. George felt his father's hands on his shoulders. "Look at me, son," said Mr. Washington. George looked up at his father. To George's surprise, his father looked calm as he said. So his father patted him on his shoulders and told him, "Look at me, son." And George looked up at his father's face, and to his surprise, his father looked calm instead of angry. "You have been honest, son. Your honesty means more to me than any cherry tree. I hope you will remember that you must always tell the truth like you did today." George never forgot his father's words. It was a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. So George was waiting what punishment his father was going to give him. So instead of punishment, his father lovingly patted him on his shoulders and told him he's so proud that his son stood by the truth. He's so proud that his son did not lie to him, and instead he chose to tell the truth. And as a man who believed in virtues, his father appreciated him and advised him always tell the truth. To tell the truth is more precious than any cherry tree to his father. So his father showed him that honesty is the best policy. So his father's words really moved him. For the rest of his life, he always stood by the truth like he did that day. And never in his life he told a lie. So children, I hope you enjoyed the story. Please read the story again and again. And remember, honesty is the best policy. That's all for today. We will meet in the next class. Until then, bye.